Okay, so I posted my list of the worst films of 2017 first because, judging by the hits I get on YouTube, people care a lot more when I talk about bad movies than when I talk about good ones. Just view the difference in hits between my Let There Be Light rant and my Dave's Faves videos. By the way, I will get back to Dave's Faves. I know I haven't done one since October. Time has been a problem, but I'm lately getting a bit more time thanks to work schedule changes and all that good stuff. But without further ado, here's a list of the top 9 films, Carl didn't watch any of them, from 2017. Why 9 instead of 10? Well, because I had a hard time trying to decide on what number 10 would be, because while there were a decent number of films that I really liked, a lot of them I didn't feel rose to the level of best to take that number 10 slot, films like Phantom Thread and The Post. Films that were really good but may have had one or two major flaws that I just felt didn't deserve a place on the list. But I did settle on a solid 9 this year, and sometimes I've done 5, sometimes I've done 7, it's dependent on the quality of movies in a year. But I have 9 this year, so let's begin. So why is John Wick Chapter 2 on here? Well, it's not an artsy movie or anything like that, it's not to the normal level of pretentiousness that I like, but it's a really solid action movie and a really solid sequel. What I liked about the first John Wick and this film is that aside from being really good action movies where it's not just a bunch of like Jason Bourne sloppy quick cutting to make you feel excited when you're just seeing boring people punch each other, this one tends to take its action sequences and show them either in a one shot or just by keeping the camera fluid, or having the editing at a regular pace so at least the spatial relations of where everyone is in relation to each other is still there, so you're not getting completely lost and it's not just, a kinetic HD, ADHD destroying of your eyeballs like a Michael Bay movie these days or something like that. Additionally, I like that while the John Wick films aren't based on any other earlier existing property, they create their own sort of mythology where you have this like underground group of assassins or hired hitmen who are kind of known to the outside world and the police but are sort of left to their own devices, and they have their own internal currency and their own rules and stuff. It feels like it's adapted from a comic book even though it's not, so I like that it added that little extra veneer to this whole thing. It also sort of excuses any sort of far-fetchedies or unusual things about this world, like why would a cop ignore that, or why are they shooting people in the subway and no one's really paying attention, and how many assassins exist in this world, because a lot of them come after John Wick. That can be sort of explained by, the rules of this universe operate differently from our own, and as I said, I think in my worst films list, I'm okay with a film not being realistic as long as it obeys by the own set of rules that it sets out for itself, and I feel that the John Wick movies do that. This movie had a great crackerjack ending in the Continental. Keanu Reeves is pretty much playing the role he was supposed to play, where it's minimal dialogue, facial emotion, and just a lot of shooting and action stuff. It doesn't require a lot of heavy dramatic acting from him. He just has to look intense and do most of his own stunts. And I like the supporting characters. Ian McShane is great. The guy who plays the villain does a decent job there. The tomboy character from Orange is the New Black, she's cool as a mute sign language assassin. They have a good fight in this Hall of Mirrors art thing that goes on. It was just a really solid action movie, and for a time being where right now the only action movies that are coming out are superhero movies or Marvel movies, and if we get an action movie it's a kind of a lame throwback like Expendables 3 or something. We're not getting a lot of just pure action that's released in theaters. We're getting a lot of Jason Statham or Nicolas Cage direct-to-video on-demand crap that comes on Netflix and sucks. But as far as just a solid, straight-ahead, this is an action movie, not action sci-fi, not action superhero, just straight ahead, this is an action movie. It's released in theaters, it's of a high quality. This is probably one of the best action movies that's come out recently, at least since the first John Wick, so that's why it's on this list. River. This movie is probably being forgotten about during award season because it was financed by the Weinstein Company, or at least was released by the Weinstein Company, even if it wasn't financed by them. Which is a shame because it's a really good movie. It's from the guy who wrote and directed it, Taylor Sheridan, I believe his name is. He also wrote Sicario, and he wrote Hell or High Water, two films that also made previous best films of the year lists from me. So this guy's 3 for 3 as far as a film he wrote being on my best films of the year list. He also directed this one. I think this one is sort of about a woman is found frozen to death on a Native American reservation. She is Native American. Based on where she's found and other circumstances, it appears to be murder, but the coroner won't rule it as a murder because she died from exposure. And it's sort of about how this like wildlife expert, or this guy from like animal control basically, or the Department of Fish and Wildlife I think it's called, teams up with this sort of newbie FBI agent to attempt to solve this murder. And it ends up dealing with some other issues, sort of like the way both sexual assaults, the way that of crimes against people on reservations are underreported by the FBI. Even things like contractors for like oil companies and things like that. So it has, much like his other movies, both Sicario and Hell or High Water, they were basically solid stories as far as what genre they're taking place in. One of them was a drama, one of them was sort of a action movie kind of. But they also have political messages that are not quite in your face, but they're hard to ignore if you're looking for them. Hell or High Water being about like the housing crisis and the financial crisis of 2008. Sicario being about deep state and about how in the post 9/11 world we've had this sort of extra expansion of military excursions and Homeland Security stuff that's not quite legal, except for, you know, Patriot Act stuff. And this one definitely has that social issues, but even if you happen to walk into this movie and you're a conservative for some reason, or something like that, you can still enjoy this film and not be bashed over the head with the politics, but the politics are there for the people who still like them. But this is mostly just a solid murder mystery. And it's beautifully shot for a first-time director. I mean, the snowy expanses and stuff help. Jeremy Renner, Elizabeth Olsen, both great. They're both in Avengers movies, but in this movie, they actually get to show a bit more acting in there. Even John Barenthal has a very small role that he's very good in. He kind of plays almost against type lately, since he usually plays like assholes. But yeah, there's a lot of really good performances in this too. It's just a really solid piece of filmmaking. I really enjoyed it, and it's a shame it's being forgotten. The Shape of Water. I generally am not a big fan of Guillermo del Toro, or let me clarify this. I'm a big fan of him as a director. I'm not a big fan of him as a writer. For the longest time I've been saying I would love Guillermo del Toro if he just directed somebody else's work. Because if you look at movies like the two Hellboys or Crimson Peak or pretty much anything he's done, they're beautiful to look at. I just have not been a fan of the script. I just haven't cared about his characters or anything like that. The Shape of Water is probably his best film, at least that I've seen. I haven't seen Devil's Backbone or some of his early Spanish language stuff. But because this is a movie where his script actually rises to the level of his directorial capabilities. Now, this is essentially sort of a spin on 1950s monster movies, but done as a romantic drama. So it has sort of a European art flavor to it, because it's essentially, you know, a Creature from the Black Lagoon type thing. That the Gill monster or whatever he's called in this movie. I like that it's a very excellent makeup, like practical effects work, and it's great to see a creature who has so much screen time in a movie actually be done practically, or at least 99% practically. There might be some CGI face stuff that goes on in one scene. And this film is about sort of a mute cleaning woman who works at a government facility, and that government facility happens to have a gill man that they plan to try and study for how its physiology can help it defeat the Soviets. You have Michael Shannon playing a really, really evil, you know, like scenery-chewing villain. It's just Michael Shannon playing Michael Shannon. Michael Shannon either plays creepy heroes like Nocturnal Animals or creepy villains like this movie. Hey, stick with what works. This film does have some social commentary, mainly about sort of xenophobia, racism, fear of the other. In this, aside from the Gill Man, you also have like the American-Soviet thing going on, and it's sort of about how loneliness as well, which is the main theme of the movie probably, how loneliness can drive outcasts to be together, and if outcasts can join, then they can be stronger than the evil xenophobic forces around them and things like that. It's not, for a year where films with political messages have been pretty overt, because the films that came out this year, some of them were greenlit or at least filmed since Trump has been president, so obviously the politics are going to seep in, much like during the Bush administration you had a lot more political content in movies. Post 9/11 pretty much also. This one is a bit more subtle about its messages. You can still go into this and it's just a basic, a love story with the, evil government officials and things like that. So, I mean, it is very much in keeping with sort of that 1950s thing, just with, more nudity and a tiny bit more violence. It's still one of the least violent Guillermo del Toro movies, even though there is copious amounts of blood at points. But really, it's just a really sweet movie, and Sally Hawkins is great for a performance where she sings in, like, one fantasy sequence, but it's completely silent and based on facial expressions and sign language. And, what's his name? I should know him because he's from Rhode Island. Richard something, but he was the father on 6 Feet Under. He's from Rhode Island, used to be at the Trinity Rap Company, from fellow Rhode Islanders watching. He does an excellent job, probably one of the better supporting performances I've seen all year. And of course, Michael Shannon is a crackerjack villain. It's just a really beautiful looking movie as far as like the cinematography and stuff, the rich, like, deep dark greens and stuff. It's a beautiful looking movie, but at least this time watching a Guillermo del Toro movie, instead of just watching it like a beautiful, like, slow moving lava lamp and admiring it more than I like it, I actually cared about the characters and actually liked the story that was going on for once too, as opposed to like Crimson Peak or Pan's Labyrinth where I just kind of wasn't into it. So yeah, this is my favorite Guillermo del Toro movie, and it's a really good movie. Baby Driver. This is just fun. I mean, this is just Edgar Wright being fun. It's a car chase movie. It's a bank heist movie. It was after this movie that the whole Kevin Spacey thing happened, and pretty much ever since House of Cards, Kevin Spacey's roles have pretty much just been spins on Frank Underwood. He hasn't had the range that he used to in like Seven or The Usual Suspects, but he's good in the movie, and it kind of sucks to compliment him now. He's a fucking pedophile, but he made a good villain. This is another movie that has John Barenthal in it. Jamie Foxx does a good job in there. John Hamm, who since Mad Men has just been wasted in motion picture, he finally gets a nice little role in this. Ansel Elgort, who I hated in The Fault in Our Stars, thought he was horribly miscast in that movie. He's really good as the lead role. Lily James, an actress I didn't know before, is basically playing, Shelley from Twin Peaks in this movie. It's got a great soundtrack, the action works, again, practical effects. This is just, there's no really deeper message to this movie. This is just a movie that is just fun and well made and skillful and just a joy to watch from beginning to end. And sometimes, when people tell me like, oh, you don't like movies that are just dumb fun or whatever, well, Baby Driver is fun. It's smart fun, but it doesn't require heavy thinking. This is the kind of movie that should be made when it's fun. Movies like this, or it was either last year or 2 years ago, The Nice Guys with Ryan Reynolds and Russell Crowe. You can have movies that are fun and aren't saying anything too deep, even if they might have a subtle message here and there. But, if you give me a choice between Fast and the Furious 9 or Baby Driver is the car chase heist movie that should be made, not that other piece of shit. So that's why I sort of like Baby Driver. Baby Driver is what mainstream blockbusters sort of should be, and the movie wasn't a blockbuster even though it was pretty successful. But when people ask me like, when you want a movie that's just fun and isn't about thinking or anything, this is the movie I want. I want Baby Driver to be disposable entertainment. I don't want Fast and the Furious. But in a world where Fast and the Furious makes $9,000 billion, Baby Driver is considered an art movie. But it's really fun. I really enjoyed it. Blade Runner 2049. A movie that a bunch of troglodytes didn't go to see because they've never seen the first one or they thought this movie was too slow and too long. Fucking Philistines. What I really liked about this movie is that it didn't try to be a future version of our world. It just tried to expand on the future world of the original Blade Runner. And the original Blade Runner was basically, what if the 80s continued up until the future? Which is basically, yeah, like if the pop culture of the 80s technologically advanced but still stayed very 80s. And then this movie is just building more upon that. So it's both retro and futuristic without being retro-futuristic at the same time. It was a really good stylistic choice to just still have Atari and all that stuff be big. So I really like that they went in that direction. I also like that, they wait until like the pretty late into the second act or early into the third act for Harrison Ford's character to even come in, which is great because Harrison Ford always seems like he's upset to be famous in any of these movies where he's reprising his old roles. So, but in this one he actually does a pretty good job. He has a couple like pretty emotional scenes, especially with the digital Sean Young double that comes in there. So he actually like gave a little bit more effort into this than he did into like Force Awakens or the Indiana Jones movie 4 or something like that. This is Denis Villeneuve, I can't pronounce his last name, my apologies, movie, and aside from absolutely despising his movie Prisoners, because I feel like that movie is basically a Pureflix movie masquerading as a murder mystery, because it's really just super Christian and anti-atheist, that's why I fucking hated Prisoners. But then he did Sicario, he did Arrival, he's turning into one of the best, most interesting directors nowadays, and now after this movie he's going to be doing another adaptation of Dune, which, if any director is going to do it, based on how he films Vegas in this movie, I would definitely choose him to do Dune, so hopefully, fingers crossed. But this movie was really good. I mean, Ryan Gosling, he plays the lead role as very, as cold as he's supposed to, and that's a great choice because there's then one scene after he finds out something, he visits the Memory Maker, and he actually has to show emotion, and for him to show emotion about like an hour and 15 minutes into the movie for the first time, it makes that scene all the more powerful. So for him to underplay his role, and he's a replicant, so he should be underplaying it, it's a very interesting, steady choice to do that, to finally give you that punch in that scene, so I really like that. Visually, the thing is spectacular. It feels like it's in the Blade Runner universe. You know, there is some digital in it, but the sets, the art direction, it never screamed CGI to me. It's still, even though I'm sure there's a lot more CGI in this movie than there is practical, everything looks practical. And I don't know how they did it. If you can make CGI look practical so that I'm not bitching about how much CGI is in the movie, great job, even though there is some obvious CGI as well. But even like Ana de Armas does a pretty decent job as like the like digital hologram girlfriend, and so the film has different commentaries about like different layers of false humanity and whether those false humans can actually have more humanity. I like how it sort of eschews the general cliches about this thing. Like in a lot of movies, like the main character thinks he's nothing special and then ends up being like the hero or like the prophesized one. Ryan Gosling, the film gives you like a bait and switch, a little spoiler here, where he thinks he's the special one, but then he's not, but he still decides to fight for something greater than himself too. Because this movie is sort of about a replicant revolution in the making, and we never see that revolution come to fruition. And unfortunately, the movie wasn't successful enough. I don't think there'll be a Blade Runner 3, at least not for another 30 years, when this movie becomes the cult classic and appreciated. Just like the first one, not appreciated in theaters. But I like that it's sort of about that. And there are some action sequences and everything, but this movie's a slow burn, and I like that. I was never bored. I never felt like, oh, come on. I felt that it should be as slow as it is, and it's a very good choice. And then there's great establishing shots. I like that they go to this like child labor camp. There's a lot of social commentary like that again is not hitting you over the head, but it's sort of about, because if Blade Runner was sort of about what happens if, you know, the Ronald Reagan, Patrick Bateman version of capitalism expands into the future exponentially and destroys everything. And this is basically another version of that. I mean, they added like a little climate change spin, which, I mean, there was some of that in the original Blade Runner, but that was more about like the Captain America environment stuff, like acid rain and things. This one is basically about like, hey, there was climate change, we had like a thing, we have like technology to try and fix that and all that stuff. So it still makes it quote-unquote modern while still expanding from that sort of like super 80s version of the future that we got in the original Blade Runner. And it, you know, considering Ridley Scott is not the best director lately, I mean, I liked All the Money in the World fine, but he's done shit like what was that movie with the like electronic collars and Michael Fassbender in it? The Counselor, that was fucking awful. And he's done Prometheus and Alien Covenant, where he's basically, even though he's making prequels to his own movie, they suck. So, I mean, Prometheus has some stuff and Covenant has some stuff, but they're not good movies. So I'm glad that Ridley Scott stayed the hell away from this sequel. It's much better to let someone else more competent these days make it. But this was a really underappreciated movie, and it was great. This was, there's like light sci-fi and heavy sci-fi, and light sci-fi is just sort of, fantasy and fun, like the Star Wars movies. And by the way, I did like Last Jedi. I don't know why everyone else didn't. You can stick with your microwave Force Awakens bullshit. But that's still, it's light sci-fi. There's no real, like, heavy message or themes to it. And then heavy sci-fi, much like one of my favorite movies, Gattaca, this is where it fits into this. This is really about sort of ideas and spreading that into it. And, with Black Mirror and stuff, there's no shortage of movies warning us about the dangers of technology and AI and digital stuff. We see that, I mean, there's 9 movies a year about that. But Blade Runner is a very specific thing where it's not the technology that's the problem, it's the humans who are the problem. Not the humans who have made like, electronic slavery and all this stuff. So the digital people, or like both the replicants and like the hologram women and things like that, they're the people we have sympathy for. It's the actual flesh and blood humans who are fucking evil, like the Jared Leto character. So I don't know. I really liked it. I don't know why it wasn't more popular. Well, I guess I do. It's a 2.5-hour movie that's a sequel to a 30-year-old movie that bombed in the first place, and it's not a bunch of whiz-bang, look at this explosion action, so American audiences are fucking troglodytes. Out. This movie's been praised, so I don't know what else I can add to the discussion, but this is a movie that's sort of, it's very much like Rosemary's Baby or The Stepford Wives, but while both of those are both original novels, and to a lesser extent the movies based on them, were more about class and gender, this one is about race. And there is some class stuff in it too, but it was a very interesting choice to make the racism that's explored in this movie not the overt Donald Trump supporter racism. This was about sort of like bourgeois, liberal, benevolent, quote-unquote racism, where black people are being subjugated and losing their personhood and agency based on like complementary racism. And it's very interesting. Like, I'd say of the 2 movies, there are 2 movies now that I think have done, in the modern era, that have done the best job of showing how strong racism is in the United States. One was Spike Lee's Bamboozled, which oddly enough is one of his least liked movies, but I felt that movie and how it showcases how racism is prevalent throughout the entertainment industry in the US, that was probably one of the only movies I've watched where as a straight white male who will never experience racism made me feel like, oh, I can almost, to the extent that a straight white male can, I can almost feel what racism must be like to experience. And I say that fully knowing I'm always going to be ignorant and I could never know. But as far as like a movie that can make you feel it a little much, or at least as much as you can, Get Out is probably the other movie. And the only reason it's not higher on the list is because, while it has the same problem that some other horror movies have, like Last House on the Left, where it injects comedy where it doesn't belong. Like, the best friend TSA character, I found him fucking annoying and hated him. I think he, much like the cops in Last House on the Left, he is the one element that sort of ruins the movie from being better than it could be. But it's still a really excellent crackerjack horror film, and it's in how everything sort of subtly builds, and to call bullshit on what's building would be sort of impolite, and that also mirrors how African Americans in American society often have to ignore or forget about the racism around them in order to successfully navigate into the world that white people have created for them. Because if they call it out, they'll be deemed like the angry black person, or they'll uppity or some other slur against them. And so the not calling out the racism is something that people actually have to do in real life. So in this movie, it's that thing that keeps him from being saved when he could just leave this house. At least for a while he could. But it's really an interesting explanation. I mean, just when they hit the deer and the cop automatically, even though the main character wasn't driving because he's black, he asked for his ID. Or that scene at the end, spoiler alert, where the car with the siren shows up, and the main character has been trying to, kill his ex-girlfriend in self-defense, but obviously in real life, if a white cop showed up, he'd automatically think the black guy was guilty and shoot him dead, which you think is going to happen at the end of this movie, and I don't know if the movie would be better or worse if it did, but when that moment happens, everyone in the audience, no matter their race, is like, yeah, I see how this looks, and in real life this would go down the way it should not go down. And, in this time frame where, Trump's election and all of this stuff has really brought race to the forefront of a lot of politics. I mean, as I talk right now, the government is shutting down because of the president's racism and not wanting to expand DACA and the Dreamer Act and all that stuff. So this movie is very much of its time, even though it also has that throwback to that sort of like social commentary 60s horror movie mentality. And I mean, it works as a horror movie. It works as a racial commentary. It really just fucking works, and it would be higher on this list if it weren't for that annoying TSA character who looks like he stepped out of a Tyler Perry movie instead. And I understand that Jordan Peele, who wrote and directed it, has a comedy background. I mean, I like Key and Peele, I liked Keanu, but I feel like he is a detriment to the movie. So that's why it's not higher. I, Tonya. I was actually surprised by how much I really liked this movie, and a lot of that has to do with Margot Robbie. When I heard that Margot Robbie was playing Tonya Harding, I didn't quite get it, but now I do. She gives a phenomenal performance. Like, having watched Tonya Harding on things like the World's Worst Inventions and like all those sort of specials, she gets like the facial expressions and the cadences of speaking and all of that like down pat. Like, I forgot that it was Margot Robbie and actually thought I was watching Tonya Harding, which is probably the best compliment you can give any actor playing a real person. Like, she nails this role. This is probably the best, certainly the best female performance, if not the best performance overall I've seen in 2017. This was a great performance. If she doesn't win Best Actress, it's a travesty. But I like that the guy who wrote Hope Floats and a bunch of really bad like romantic comedies from the 90s wrote this movie, and it sort of plays like a darkly comic like Rashomon, where sometimes it follows like different points of view, and there's some like characters breaking the fourth wall and a lot of stuff. There's a lot of interesting like little narrative tricks that go in. And the director's the guy who made like Lars and the Real Girl. He's pretty talented at these like skew off-kilter comedies, and this movie is really funny. I mean, aside from like the drama and stuff that happens, it is really, really funny. This is probably one of the funniest comedies that came out this year. And I like that this is another movie that has some social commentary in it that I enjoyed, which is about sort of the lie of the American dream being about merit. Or because the idea of the American dream is sort of that anybody through hard work and persistence can be successful. And that's bullshit. And we sort of see this in the realm of Tonya Harding. Tonya Harding, who, she's white trash. I mean, that's how she grows up. I think she kind of owns that label herself. But she's really good at figure skating. And that's something that in the post Nancy Kerrigan thing happened, is that she got to the Olympics. She did a triple axel. She was a really good ice skater. And people sort of forget that. They think, I don't know what they think, but she was really good. And despite her actual skill and her merit, the judges and stuff didn't want her because she wasn't from the right class. She didn't dress the right way. She didn't do her acts to the songs that they wanted. She did not fit into this world. And so merit can only get you so far beyond the economic stratus or the caste system that America has. And I like that the movie points that out. And the movie is also sort of about how victimization works and how victims can often stay victims or become different types of victims. And even when victims become perpetrators, they may be doing that because they were themselves victimized. I've heard a lot of discussion about this film, like not treating Nancy Kerrigan as a character even though she's the victim. But the issue I have with that is, that's not what the movie's about. And two, Nancy Kerrigan is all that anyone is truly focused on from this event since it happened. So maybe just taking a look at the other side isn't wrong. And what I like about this movie is it appears, at least the movie seems to be arguing that all Tonya Harding really agreed to is like a false death threat, which is still wrong, but it's a lot different than physical assault, and that it was her husband and the jokers he got up with that really hatched this whole thing. So in a sense, she took more culpability than she deserved. Her punishment, that she couldn't ever like professionally ice skate again, was about a bit more punishment than the other actual perpetrators got. And the fact that she was basically a joke, and the movie makes it that this was sort of the biggest story in tabloid news until the OJ trial, and so she was then sort of victimized. She was attacked for her look, she was attacked for her class. Basically, the entire media and everything made fun of her, and so, after being, abused by her mother and after being abused by her husband, she's then abused by the world at large. And when all she really wanted to do was just skate the way she wanted to skate. And it's really kind of sad. She ends up becoming a tragic figure. And that doesn't excuse her from her actual bad actions, but just maybe have a little empathy for somebody. I mean, movies exist for empathy. I mean, Get Out exists as a movie to be like, hey, bourgeois white people, check yourself. Have a little bit of empathy for a person you'll never be. And this is another thing. Aside from attacking the lie that is the American dream, Tonya really focuses on maybe take away all of these popular figures who you make fun of. Maybe they're not cartoons. Maybe they're real people. And maybe you should think about that for 5 seconds. And I really liked that the movie was that, aside from being extremely stylish and really funny and having the best performance I've seen all year in it. Lady Bird. Look, I'm a sucker for coming-of-age movies, the old John Hughes stuff, and, personally, this is because my own teen in early 20 years sucked, so I never lived the experiences that I wanted to, so I live vicariously through movies. I think a lot of people do that, My life wasn't The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and Clerks, or well, I guess my life is a little bit more like Clerks, but I never got to live these experiences, really, and so that's why I sort of live vicariously through them. But Lady Bird is a really good example of this genre. It's a dramedy, it mixes the comedy and the drama. It's a period piece that I haven't seen before. It's an early 2000s period piece. I mean, 80s nostalgia has been going on strong since maybe like The Wedding Singer in the late 90s. 90s nostalgia is something that's popping up right now, especially with a lot of 90s properties being remade. We're still a little bit early for earlier 2000s nostalgia, but here we go. This is a movie that takes place in a high school in the early 2000s, and as someone who graduated high school in 2001 and was in high school in the late 90s and early 2000s, I certainly recognize some of this. I was in a public school and not a Catholic school, for obvious reasons, but I still sort of got that. And the Lady Bird character herself she's very likable. She's one of these female acerbic, very smart for her age acerbic wits. You can think like the two main characters in Ghost World, or you can think Daria, maybe a little less emo and depressing than Daria is. But she's one of those characters. It's kind of a stock character at this point, but what's keeping me from fully going into that is that I've known a lot of people like this. Most of my female friends are women like this, so I know this is a real person. Plus, this seems to be at least semi-autobiographical for writer-director Greta Gerwig, who was great in that movie Greenberg, even though I haven't seen as much of her work as I should have. And a lot of people don't like Greenberg, but just because you hate the main character doesn't mean it's a bad movie. You're supposed to hate him. Anyway, I digress. But, there's not a lot of political message in this movie like some of the other stuff on the list, but there's a lot of interesting stuff here that's still about class. Lady Bird comes from a pretty poor family, but it's the kind of family that is poor but would consider it middle class because they have a house. Just it doesn't have the whole Marxist critique that there's no such thing as a middle class, because that's something I would argue. But it's one I know a lot of these families. I mean, I grew up in Johnston, Rhode Island. There's everyone there is pretty much poor and thinks they're middle class anyway. So I sort of get that. They're literally on the wrong side of the tracks. And, you get through. She has a contentious relationship with her mother. She has a loving relationship with her father. Her brother and his girlfriend live at the house, too. Their relationship's a little strained. She has her best friend, but she also tries to hang out with the popular clique for a while. She has a crush on one kid who ends up gay. She has a crush on another kid who ends up being a pretentious, self-involved douche. Not everything that happens feels realistic. And there's nothing like overtly, there's nothing in the movie to make me say this is why it's a great movie. You just kind of have to watch it, because we get a lot of coming-of-age movies that come out. Sometimes they're shit like The Space Between Us, or, a lot of the stuff that looks like it should be a free-form TV movie. And sometimes you get, like, throwbacks to the 80s, like The To-Do List, which was a really good, like, female-centric sex comedy, or you get stuff like that. But this is very much in the John Hughes camp. It's maybe a bit more dramatic, so it's more on like the Pretty in Pink scale than it would be like the 16 Candles scale, but it's one of those type of movies. And if you're a huge fan of coming-of-age movies, it's a genre that I've always loved, and it makes me feel like I'm 16 again, except having a better version of the 16-year-old experience than actual Dave had. And it's just, there's great performances. Laurie Metcalf is really good in it. I haven't seen her this good since, a handful of episodes of Roseanne. This isn't over-the-top scream, too, Laurie Metcalf. I can't pronounce her first name, Saoirse Ronan. I mean, she was great in that movie where she's a female assassin a couple of years ago. I think Tilda Swinton or Cate Blanchett, who I confused both of them, was in it. She's really good in this. It's just, there's some solid performances. I like the time period specific music. I like the priest drama teacher as like a throwaway funny character. This is just, it feels like real people that you care about. And sometimes the best movies aren't necessarily message movies or broad comedies or anything like that. Sometimes it's just movies where Carl is sneezing. Sometimes it's just movies where the characters feel like genuine real people and you enjoy watching them. And that's what this movie is. And considering some of the other movies on this list, and maybe it's a little weird that I have it so high up, but as far as like a pure, like I had a good time at this movie, Lady Bird was one of the best times I had at the movies this year. My best film of the year, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Now, look, I know there's some sort of like backlash against this movie since it won the Golden Globe about how it deals with race. I didn't have a problem with that, or how like the Sam Rockwell character is quote-unquote redeemed. I didn't have any of the problems I'm reading about this movie I did not have with it. I mean, for a movie that deals with race, yeah, maybe some of the black characters could have been bigger characters than just guy who gives the duplicate billboards to Frances McDormand and, a woman who owns the gift shop Frances McDormand works at, sure. But this is a movie that very much encapsulates the time we live in now. It deals with sexual assault, it deals with police brutality, it deals with race, it maybe deals a little less with class than I normally like for a Marxist. But this is a movie that it's touching on all the stuff, gender roles, everything like that. There's a little bit of discrimination stuff too with the Peter Dinklage character, but really, I really love this movie. This was really greatly written, and for a movie that is a really dark comedy and it switches tones on a hat, it still feels consistent, even though it can go from pitch black comedy to really heavy drama to comedy again. It jumps back and forth, yet it feels fine. It never feels scattershot. Sam Rockwell, even though people are giving the character's arc shit, is phenomenal in this movie. This is one of the best things I've ever seen him in, and Sam Rockwell's been consistently a very good, underappreciated actor in stuff like Choke, or Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, or Moon. He's a really good actor, and he was great in this. This is probably the best supporting role I've seen all year. Frances McDormand just kind of plays the character we see her a lot in, but she's still good in it. And Peter Dinklage has a fun little role. There's some other people you'll recognize that are pretty good in it. But Woody Harrelson is really good in it, too. A lot of the times now, Woody Harrelson just kind of plays a version of what he played in True Detective, so it's kind of either a nice guy asshole or a villain asshole. This one, he actually plays like a good guy and actually uses his acting talent. And there's a plot twist involving him that I did not see coming, and yet doesn't feel exploitative or anything. Anyway, the plot of the movie is that a woman's daughter was raped and murdered, and they never caught the guy, so she puts up 3 billboards to shame the police into not doing more than they could be. And in fairness to the police, it seems like based on the evidence they have, there's not much more they can go on, but she still persists toward it. And basically these billboards start to fray the town and how it's loosely held together. And especially Sam Rockwell as a character, he tortured a black suspect in custody, and he's like a virulent racist, and he's basically every worst cop you've ever seen on the news. And yeah, he does have a character arc where he's given some advice and he learns empathy, but I don't think that excuses his actions or anything. Where I think other people do. But this is really a movie of its time, and it's just phenomenally written. This is definitely the best screenplay of 2017 as far as what ended up being produced. And it's really hard for me to describe what's great about it unless you just sit and watch it. Like the way it deftly handles tone shifts, the way it can go from dark and scary to hilarious, to sort of violating expectations and everything. It's certainly one of the most original films I've seen this year, and I haven't seen anything else the director-writer did. I didn't see In Bruges and I didn't see Seven Psychopaths yet, but I've heard good things about those. But yeah, I was blown away by this movie. This is why, the top 4 movies on this list, I had a hard time juggling what order they go in, but ultimately I settled on Three Billboards as probably being the best movie of 2017. Maybe I'll change my opinion after I record this, but as far as a movie that just flat out impressed me with how it handles everything, whether it's the commentary, the characters, the dialogue, shifting in tones, anything like that, this movie, any one thing could have happened to make this movie go wrong. Either the humor would be badly placed, or the subject matter could have been handled horribly, but I feel like the director-writer he walked a tightrope and he made it to the other side. And so I gotta give him kudos for that. This is my pick for the best film of 2017. So, that being said, that's my opinion on this year's movies. Let me know what you thought in the comments, because these lists are just about personal opinion and arguing about them for fun.